Good morning. How are you today? Well, it's a gorgeous day with the leaves turning. It's soggy but not wet. I've already been in court this morning by phone, distance advocacy, if you will. And I have had a moment or two to listen to what's happening at the Senate hearing for Judge Barrett. And Lindsey Graham actually conducted a good examination, which I think was rehearsed. But is misleading in several respects. And Dianne Feinstein, if you can hear nothing else, listen to her examination because it's spot on all the issues. Well researched, well put, respectful, and it undermines Barrett's nomination. Not that most of us needed it, but it's always good to have the details. So, for example, there's this notion that the law is something that you can just look up like you would in a dictionary. And that's what she's going to do. She's not going to change the law. She's not going to be an activist. She's going to do what the law says. Well, the problem with that is that's not how the law works. And her argument plays upon the ignorance of those people who've never had a lawsuit and aren't lawyers. Because what she's really doing and what they really do is that the Supreme Court, it makes the decisions that can't be made elsewhere. So, for example, New York has one view of a statute or a constitutional principle. California has another, and they differ in their result. That difference comes to the court. There's no dictionary you can look up how you should decide that case. You have to do what they hope young lawyers can show they have a proficiency at when they take the LSAT test, which is to see similarities. A is to B is B is to C, so A is to C in a certain way. Meaning, you look at a precedent, a court case which involves facts and legal principles and constitutional principles, and how does it compare to this present case so that it is binding or not on this case? So that's number one. Number two is when she's asked about the critical issues, you name the issue, abortion, the Affordable Care Act, guns, the president asking you to help him because he lost the election, but he's challenging it because he says it's not right and not fair. And we'll talk about that in a second. On this, she says, well, there are precedents and super precedents. Now, in my podcast, if you listen to it, I talk about this in more detail, but the simplest form goes like this. She says there are super precedents and precedents, lesser precedents. And of course, Roe v. Wade is prominently featured among those lesser precedents. And she has been promised to the right-wing constituents that she's going to reverse Roe v. Wade. Well, one of the super precedents is Brown against the Board of Education. And that's an interesting choice because Brown was decided in 1954. Well, decade passed, more than that, in which it wasn't followed. There was massive resistance to that precedent. So, and she talks about a super precedent as one that's been out there long enough that there's no longer popular dissent. Well, are you kidding? This year we're talking about racism is systemic and Brown against Board of Education is not relevant? Give me a break. So that's one of the arguments she makes. And Roe v. Wade, how will we decide that? Well, there's a pluralistic approach we have to consider. Well, what is that approach? That approach is to look at how she looks at a case as compared to how, say, Justice Breyer would look at a case. Breyer looks at the Constitution as a living document, and Barrett looks at it as, I'm going to go see what the founders were saying when they wrote this ambiguous language in the Constitution so that it could be a living Constitution. That's really her view. But when she was asked point blank today by Dianne Feinstein, you say that you're going to do what Scalia did. Fine. He said Roe was decided wrongly. Do you agree with him or not? And she wouldn't say. Well, it may come before us, and I don't know. Well, I think what we have here is we have an election year issue, whether or not she gets confirmed. And I know the number counters say that she'll be confirmed by the narrowest of margins. That aside, American public are looking at a woman who doesn't care about all those people who lose health care, doesn't care about a woman's right to be let alone and the use of her body, doesn't care to give us an opinion how in God's world she could be a logical successor to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But in that sense, you know, when we had Thomas, what did he have to do with Thurgood Marshall? No connection at all. One is gender and one is race. But after that, the belief system is in contravention of what these towers in the Supreme Court stood for. So, and a brief note about our president. He's in the wrong state given where the battlegrounds are because he doesn't have the money. He probably shouldn't be campaigning because he really should be resting for 20 days after this thing happened. The tests that he's had published are, well, very faulty. And the infectious disease people are saying that. So we don't really know if he's infectious or not. And then he had a rally with 2,000 people, not that many people. And they didn't wear masks and they didn't do anything. So we can expect he'll spread. I think that the polls are very good. And the only path that Trump has to being reelected, provided we all do what we have to do, is to challenge the election. And that's why he wants that judge on the court. So, you know, the usual. Vote if you haven't, get a friend to vote, spend a little money on a candidate, $5 or $10, and take care of yourself. Be well, because we need you for restoring the republic when we kick this asshole out of the Congress, out of the White House. Did I say that? I did. I'm sorry. It's a very brisk day here. Bye-bye.